Presto Changeo. Ta-da! Hey, I'm CaptainPira, and in this month of me going through my stash fabric, I'm picking an abandoned project rather than repurposing impulse buys. And it's the school blazers from Little Witch Academia, because they are super cute and I wanted to wear them for real life. Every cosplayer should have at least one comfortable cosplay in their wardrobe. If you're like me and have glasses, that can really limit your options. There's nothing like Sunday morning of con trying to get the contacts into your bleary, worn out eyes. So for me, Lotte was a great option for a while because I could wear my real glasses and a shake and go wig and some pretty comfortable, almost real world clothing, so if I have to take public transit home, I'm not getting as many weird looks. The main problem was, in Canada, we have two types of conventions: incredibly hot summer cons and really cold winter cons. A little more options, I thought I'd make the jacket for the uniform. So let's show you how to make it.
To make a double-breasted jacket, you need extra fabric at the front to overlap. So I extend the center line of my front sloper to about the breast point. The jacket also extends to my hip, so I need approximately 6 inches of my skirt sloper as well.
Okay, so the final pattern should look something like this. I'm going to cut it out this shape, but I'll probably cut away some of the neckline. That way you can see the collar and the bow of the school uniform underneath, but I'd rather have too much than too little. The length of this should come to about the hip joint, so maybe even a little higher than this, but I'll leave some room to hem. And then I'd continue this line and this line to where they meet, I just didn't have the paper. The back panel should be pretty similar. You're going to want the back skirt sloper as well, and about 6 inches or however long you're using on the front. To keep it symmetrical, you don't want a big zigzag going on.
I also use my back sloper to draft the cape portion, following the shoulder slope, then softly curving out, leaving space for your arm. The front of the cape doesn't extend to the center, as it needs to hit at about where the sleeves would come out.
And then your cape should be the same length as both of those, so I'll probably wait until I've got my vest largely assembled before I cut this. Cut it on the fold if you can in the center back, save you seams, why would you cut them if you don't have to? And then it's going to be open a little further at the front, so that way your arms can come out and move around, but also you can see the double-breasted feature at the front. So this is usually my go-to hood pattern. This is a trace-off I did for the Medusa build, so it's not normally pointy. Normally it would follow this curve, but this is for a different neckline than I'll have, so I probably want just a gentle curve all the way around, and I'd remove this, especially since the cape isn't going that far forward. I'm probably going to want this to end about where it does on the cape. So I think it's time to start cutting. For this project, I'm pretty sure all of my materials came from Fabricland. I got most of them at the same trip because I was planning to make this to, I think, upgrade my Akko uniform for MTAC when it's pretty cold out. I picked up probably 5 meters of probably a polyester wool. I don't imagine real wool would have been cheap enough. And it's pretty thick and heavy, and it's been taking up a ton of space in my house for years, so it's one of the reasons I want to get on with this. 5 meters is probably way too much, but that's what I tend to buy when I'm in doubt, which means I have a lot of excess stash even when I make my projects, so don't do as I do. I also have bias tape in a kind of salmony pink because that's what the main crew wears. Some of the other students have a different color trim, so if you're making those, feel free to get the brown or whatever color matches them. I think some of them have more of a burgundy as well. And I have a lot of big gold buttons. I should have 6 matching. And that should cover everything visible on this costume. but I didn't think to get lining back then. But I found this, which is conveniently the color of the bias tape and the color of the outside fabric. And I think this is left over from my Utena cosplay a million years ago. So this should be a nice match to line it with. And yeah, I should actually get cutting now.
My wool is wide enough, I can fit the front and back bodice panels beside each other, being sure to cut the back on the fold. The cape should also be about the same length as the jacket. The lining isn't nearly as wide, so placing my patterns involves more Tetris. Ultimately, it's okay if my pieces come up short in the lining because I'd like the bottom edges to be wool. Starting with the vest, I mark off the darts on both my wool and lining and sew them in.
So with the darts in, I can get a better feel of how it's going to fit, but I'm still going to sew the three main pieces of the vest together. See if I need to take in any darts, that way I can do it to the lining as well before both sides are joined together.
Next, I can sew the front and back together at the sides.
The outer shell of the vest, roughly assembled. It's double-breasted, so these panels should go pretty far overlapping on each side. And if it's not lining up at the bottom, I probably need to adjust where I've placed it at the top. Tighten the neck for my own bad posture, but also to allow the collar underneath to go through, so probably about 2 fingers down. And then also I'm feeling these are coming out a little hard and sharp. Probably take it in about 3 fingers on each side.
At this point, I realize my shoulders go out too far and will make the cape pointy, so I trim a good 1.5 inches off the outer edge. Then I need to repeat this for the lining, being careful to trim off the same amount.
So I think I've done about 3 to 4 hours of work today, and that included the patterning, the cutting, and vaguely assembling the shells of the vest. So to make this match the wool shell, I'm going to need to cut a strip of wool to kind of like hem over, and that way if it flips up, you're not seeing the lining, you're seeing the wool. These little bits to go over the armhole edges, so that way this wouldn't poke through at the arm openings either, but then I cut my arm openings bigger and these no longer fit. Honestly, the wool's really bulky. I think I'm just going to forgo it. But I think I'm going to stop for the night, and we'll see what my enthusiasm is like tomorrow.
My lining is short, so I trace off the bottom of my vest pattern in wool and cut about 3 inches above. This I can stitch to the bottom of my lining. I do this to the vest as well as the cape. When that's on, I can sew the outer shell to my lining. I can sew around all the outer edges, then turn my vest right side out at the armhole. On reflection, I could have sewn on the right side and hidden my seams with the bias tape, and could have avoided struggling with 4 layers of wool on my sewing machine, but that's not what I did. Starting at the back neck, I clip bias tape along all the outer edges and sew it down. Starting with the back edge, then fold it over and stitch down, making sure to hide the stitches from the first pass.
I need to check which side goes over top before I commit to anything, that it needs the 6 buttons still, and looking at the art again, there's actually pockets, so I need at least a little bias tape along here and here to give the illusion of pockets, but I'll probably, since I haven't sealed it up yet, make actual functioning pockets, although they're pretty short, so I don't know that I'd be able to get much in them. The bias tape took up a lot more than I anticipated, so this was a pack and about like 8 more inches on top of that. So although I want to trim the armholes in bias tape, I'm going to wait until the pockets are in before I commit to that, just to make sure I have enough. But I think I'm going to stop for the day and do the cape tomorrow.
The cape is easier. I sew front sides and back together for both the wool and the lining. I was going to cut more wool for the lining edge, but realized my outer layer was long enough I could fold it over instead.
So I was going to cut out an additional piece of wool trim for the bottom of the lining, but then I realized the difference between the lining and the outside casing is so significant, I think I'd actually planned to fold it over. So I'm just trying on my undervest, clipped in place for the moment, to get a feel for how much longer this is, because I want them to hit at a pretty similar height. So it's more than all of my fingers. It's probably from here to here, which means that even if I fold it over, like, that's still well over an inch. So I think I'm going to join the cape inside and lining by the underseam and then have this folded inward when I do the outer edges rather than cutting a new piece. But I'll see if that works or not.
I sew the bottom edges together, then start pinning front to back from the neck down to be sure that my fold in the wool will be in the right place. Then I sew the sides, leaving the neck open to turn. Since my hood is a lot different from my pattern piece, I also use a hoodie for reference, particularly for the back curve. My wool piece is wider at the front edge than the lining because I also wanted the outer edge of this to be trimmed in wool. I did forget it would be trimmed in bias tape, but I'm not sure that would have changed my mind. I sew my hood pieces together, then join lining and shell. Then I pin the hood into the opening of the cape. The neck hole is far too small, so I cut it about an inch deeper, then try again. The offcut from the neck helps me cut a curved piece of wool to cover the joining seams.
For now, I'm actually looking to add the pockets. So I want to make sure that it's about my hand length and that it doesn't conflict with this or the side seam too much. So I'm thinking here to here, and when I take it off, I'll get to see where it actually fits and try and take the left and right side together and calculate where a good spot would be. I can't see if this is showing up on camera, but it's here to here and here to here. And that's actually touching the side seam, so I might need to move it a little further forward.
Something I missed in initial planning was the vest pockets. There's not a lot of space for them, but I want to be sure they're symmetrical. The inserts are just pouches made from offcuts of lining. Being sure to cut only the outer shell, I opened the length of the pocket and can hand stitch the pouches in and cover the edge seams in bias tape.
If your cosplay has pockets and you're not sure if you need them, put the pockets in anyway. If your cosplay doesn't have pockets and you're not sure if you need them, put the pockets in anyway. You will thank yourself later.
With all my visible bias tape accounted for, I have just enough to trim my armholes, being sure to catch both the wool and the lining.
So I've added the back darts off camera just to fit a little nicer, because when I have my arms out, the cape opens and you might be able to see my back after all. All that's left is to figure out where my buttons go. Try and make sure that the bottom is squared and everything's laying fairly flat and comfortably. And then I'm going to double check my reference before I start drawing things and make sure this is the proper side for this to be closed on. This appears to be correct. Double check in my mirror. Okay, so I'm going to draw along where these go and where I feel the other part comes to. That way I can lay it flat on the table and I can place these. I take them off their card backs. Get an idea? These ones are going to want to be right at the top, but I'm probably going to keep the bottom row a little further up just because the spacing is quite wide this way and not very wide this way, and I don't want it to look weird. But this is probably where the top two will go. So I'm going to take it off, mark it down, and then do my buttonholes probably.
Lastly, I need to place my buttons. There are 6 on the uniform, so I need to take care they cover enough of the jacket without looking too far apart. Then I mark off both sides of each button to determine my holes. My automatic button holder doesn't always cooperate, so use a wide zigzag stitch with minimal spacing. When the holes are complete, you can cut them open or use a seam plucker with a pin as an end stop. Then, the open holes can be used to mark where your hand stitch buttons go.
And with all the buttons on, time to try it on. Some of the holes are a little snugger than others, but for the most part I can just cut them open deeper if needed. And there we go. You can see the darts at the back give it a lot more curve here. And the pockets, while not very deep, did fit all my buttons when I was bringing them down to hand sew. Could probably fit something about the size of this pin case. Let's give it a try. So I can probably fit a coin purse or a hotel key. Definitely not your cell phone, but still usable. And of course this should be worn with the cape. I'm not sure if I'm going to stitch it in place to the shoulders of the vest or create snaps. The only advantage to snaps would be that it's removable, but if you're going to see the snaps underneath anyway, there's not really a whole lot of point. Yeah, let's try this with the costume. In my original planning, I thought that this would be a single capelet jacket, not 2 separate pieces. But on further inspection, it seemed like there was a lot of bunching here that didn't really imply the seams were coming out of the vest, because if this was worked into the seams, it would be pretty smooth and the bunching would come closer to the arm. And most of the bunching is at the hood join. I also ended up limiting my pieces just to make it a little easier. So the vest is front panel, and a single back panel, instead of my original guess of having a main front panel. I thought it would add a lot of bulk at the seams that I didn't want. The hood shape I also simplified a lot. I also forgot that it was going to have bias tape here. And I'd probably add a snap here because this likes to flip. It is pretty snuggly to wear this inside. I'm not sure this is actually warm enough for winter, so I wouldn't wear this going to a convention in December, but it's probably good for running around outside of the convention for a few minutes if you can leave your real coat in the car. I used about 2 meters of the blue wool, so I have a lot of this left. More than enough to make another cloak if someone wants to cosplay with me. The lining, however, I had 2 meters, I think, from Utena left over, and used nearly all of it. I have enough lining left over possibly for another hood if I wanted to make the robes later. The bias tape, however, was exactly enough, like so exactly enough it was uncomfortable. So if you're making your own, you probably want a little more. One package is 2.75 meters, so you'd probably want like 6 meters to be comfortable, or forego using it on your armholes. I thought this was going to be a really simple project because it was just a vest and a cape, or what I thought at the time would be a single jacket, but I'm very bad at calculating these things is what I've learned. And while I've only put in 2 to 4 hours a day, I did end up working on this for about 4 days. I think most of the problem is I'm unfamiliar working with wool, and the extra bulk does actually take a lot of time to work with, especially in things like the bias tape. But it's good to try new things, and it's good to make a note of when things are more challenging than you realize so you can have more accurate numbers going forward. As usual, thank you for watching. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I know it got a little more muddled than usual because I'm not as familiar with making jackets or suiting, and I really hate lining things. This should also probably all be ironed around the edges. If you're coating all of your edges in bias tape, you don't really need to turn your seams. You can just have the raw edges out and then cover them with bias tape, just making sure that the bias tape is in fact further than the stitch line, so you might want to trim it down depending. I could have easily just serged all these edges, and then I would have had a much easier time getting my bias tape to lay down flat, because 4 layers of wool is a lot for a home machine. So if you're making your own, take that into account, and good luck. Actually, if you've made your own of anything that I've made in these videos, please, take me on Instagram. I would love to see. If you've got any questions, comments, concerns, let me know in the comments. And if you feel like subscribing, that would be great. Next month, I think I'm going to go back to something that's more pieces, but more simple pieces. And will probably be a whole cosplay, assuming I can find everything I need to repurpose in my stash fabric. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Well, time to go. Almost forgot my hat. Much better. See you.